Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to Atlantic Bushcraft Adventures. Tonight we're on episode 191, and we are talking about cold weather bedding. And I almost said cold weather camping. That's a completely other topic we did before. But cold weather bedding specifically. And it is that time of year when it's time to start thinking about it, isn't it, Ben?
Well, yeah, I guess it is. We're getting frost here, eh?
Yeah,
I,
we've been
I
getting frost. Well, you know what? It's weird. We've had a couple heavy frosts here. But then we had this like heat wave come through, and it was 20 some odd degrees, and apparently it's supposed to be 21 or 22 again on the weekend. So, I mean,
Wow.
real odd for November in Canada if anybody's aware of our weather, but I'm not going to, say anything. Hoping I might be able to sneak out a little bit this weekend if the weather holds the way it's supposed to.
Sweet. I have no such hopes anymore. I just need to get through the next few weeks and then see what happens. But
Well, it's still relatively new for anybody that didn't know. Ben has moved, and if you're joining us after a long hiatus, we are now coast to coast in Canada. We cover clear from one side to the other, pretty much. But I
through no
digress.
no intentional expansion, we have now made it clean across the country.
Just the way it worked out, but I think it's been great. A little bit more experiences. Actually, we're able to cover a little bit more stuff because there is that difference between provinces now, so a little more vegetation and stuff. But such as topics for previous episodes. If anybody hasn't listened, I do encourage you to jump on and check them out. But as we said, tonight is cold weather bedding. And this is an interesting conversation because I can think back to when you and I were talking about getting our sleeping bags. And that's really where the cold weather bedding thing came in because we did want sleeping bags. And don't get me wrong, this isn't a topic about sleeping bags. I'm just using this reference. We wanted sleeping bags that were going to do us for the winter. We wanted to, use cold weather bags, but we wanted something that was good all the way around. And it actually came down to cold weather bedding, simply because, well, for me anyway, I looked at some that potentially didn't have the below zero rating that I wanted because ultimately I wanted something that was like rated for minus 30 Celsius or something ridiculous. And I was like, well, I'll get one that's like minus 18 and maybe I can augment it. So that's something else you can think about during the cold weather bedding. But anyway, just our kind of little story there. How do you think's the best to go about this, Ben? Where do you want to start? Because I got a lot of thoughts.
I think let's just look at a few things before we even talk too much about bedding, because a lot of people may not understand this. There's a few ways you lose heat when you're in the woods, and was it convection, convec, uh,
Convection, conduction,
yeah, conduction,
radiation.
and radiation. So what I've been told, everyone talks about, oh, we got to get a really good sleeping bag, and the thing is, we lose way more heat to what we lay on than we ever do to the air above us. And in fact, a good shelter and a good bedding does more for you than the sleeping bag ever does. And most people don't even really understand that. So, what you stick underneath you and preventing the wind from blowing over you, and that's your convection part. You can get rid of that. And conduction part is what are you physically pressed against? Because air is not a great uh, conductor of heat, and that's what it is. It's the loss of heat through conduction, right, or through one of those three means. So if you lay on a block of ice, you're cold. I mean, that's the basics of it, right? If you're physically touching something, you're going to be cold, and if you have air moving over you, you're going to get cold. So if you can stop the airflow and you can keep yourself from physically touching anything cold, you've done the majority of what you can do. And then anything over and above that is just bonus. So your bedding is actually one of the absolutely most important things, especially in winter, that you can do to sort of help yourself out.
A good example of that was anybody that's tried hammock camping without an underquilt or something like that, the cold butt syndrome. Very
Yeah.
common because you're compressing all the insulation from your sleep system underneath your hammock. Little breeze spurs up, and you get that kind of little cold spot that usually runs over your butt or the small of your back. And that's caused by exposure, literally. Like you've compressed all your insulating materials, that wind is close to you, it's pushing the heat away, so you get cold spots. Even though your sleeping bag could be rated for like minus 18 and it's only a 5-degree night out, you're still getting cold.
And in fact, there are sleeping bags out there. They're considered a hybrid sleeping bag where you get like a synthetic material that's on the bottom side of your sleeping bag and it's down on top. And it's because down offers absolutely no insulation when compressed. It really is valueless once compressed. But if the loft is what gets you insulation on your sleeping bag, where synthetic insulation usually still offers you some degree. It's not as much as if it's lofted by any means, but it's a bit more, and that's why you can get these. You're getting the best insulation for your cost there, right? You're putting cheaper stuff underneath that's going to give you some value, and you're putting expensive over top stuff up top where you're going to get lots of value. So slightly off topic there, but that's the three things. So that's why it's important to have good insulation underneath you, because what you're physically touching now in the hammock method you mentioned, that's still convection. That's air moving through, and it's because two things. One, in a hammock, you rarely have a way of stopping the air from traveling underneath you, and two, like you said, you've now got your insulation crushed underneath you, so you've opened yourself up to one of the lesser ways of losing heat. You lose heat two ways there: convection and just radiation. Your body's radiating heat out. There's nothing bouncing it back, so it's just gone. And then you have cold air just going underneath you and just robbing you of a bit more heat. So you're losing heat in a hammock two ways there. If you lay directly on the ground, you have no convection, and radiated heat will go into a cold surface and just kind of get absorbed in there. It'll take you forever to heat up the ground. And it's conduction. It's almost all conduction stealing your heat at that point. So
where you did mention that there is three ways to lose heat there: convection, conduction, and radiation. I guess why don't we start a conversation with how we can eliminate those things and the materials that we use to go along that. So the big one, as Ben said, is conduction. It's really the biggest one for most people getting out there and just starting off, be it because most of us, honestly, we don't jump right into a hammock. That usually comes later as you want to get more experimental. Some do, not saying everybody, but the vast majority, generally their first experience is going to be tenting. So they're going to be either sleeping on a cot or they're going to be sleeping on a ground, and you're still going to, well, even in a cot, you're going to get the same problems as a hammock, so a lot of this would cover there too. But most people sleep on the ground, you know what I mean? As kids, I think both of us can say that we remember camping. You basically got your bedroll and you slept on the ground, you know what I mean? But the key
100%.
thing there is bedroll. We weren't just climbing in our sleeping bags and jumping on the ground, and this is where a lot of people go to. They just take their tent, they set it up, they unroll their sleeping bag, they crawl in, they lay in the tent, and then they complain about being cold and probably a little uncomfy and stuff like that too, because the bedding was incorrect for what they needed. There was a lot of conduction there, radiation, as Ben said, so you got to eliminate those. And some good ways of getting rid of that is literally just putting material under you. But it has to be the right material. Because some materials, as Ben said, if you put ice under you, in the right circumstances, ice is a great insulator. But it's poor when it's in contact with something because it creates a heat sink, basically. And that's kind of where the materials thing comes into play there. You want the right stuff under you to try and not become a heat sink, but to trap that heat next to you or keep as much warmth from radiating away as possible.
Yeah. So I guess next step is, well, let's talk about the absolute cheapest, most natural methods we can find, and then work our way up. So let's start on the basics. What did we do 500 years ago? And so if you were to look at that, you would probably find we used a couple of methods, and one is just debris. So we would have built up a bed of debris of like dry leaves, twigs, moss, stuff like that. And the emphasis has to be here on dry. And it's got to be thick. So it not only does it need to be dry, but it needs to be a fair amount of it. Something like hay would do a really good job. So a lot of dried straws and stuff like that. Anything you can build. And I think on a previous episode you mentioned, you're talking like, even in its compressed form, you still want 6, 8, 10, 12 inches ideally, right?
Yeah, 8 to 14 inches, I think, is what they say, which is a lot of material. Like, most people strongly underestimate that.
Yeah, that's a lot. So essentially what you would do in that case, that's a picture like a lean-to type setup. If not even dug down, then you build it up. And what you're going to have to do is probably take some logs and make a little fence, you make a box and you just fill that box and you sleep on it. When you get up next morning, that material is going to be crushed down. You're going to have to replace a lot of that. And after 2 or 3 nights of that, you probably would have something relatively stable. Um, this will work. You can get quite warm using this kind of method. Here, there are some issues with it. One is like insects and bugs. It needs to be kept very clean. You would need to air the stuff out. Moisture will build up into this pretty quickly because all these materials are naturally going to absorb any moisture in the air, any moisture from your body. So you have to work at this. This is not an easy process, but it is a process. It's something you can use. So
Not
that would be
easy, but
what
very effective.
very effective. Properly done, you will get very comfortable and you can survive in some ridiculous weather with that. Um,
And honestly,
match that up.
oh, sorry, go ahead.
I was going to say, match that up with a good shelter to prevent wind from traveling over the top of you, and maybe a spot so some fire can radiate some heat in on you. You won't need much more than a solid blanket or a good, hide. So, if you could come across, say, a moose hide or a bear hide to go over the top of you, that would make it this place that you could sleep very comfortably in ridiculous temperatures.
What I was going to say was it's very underutilized. Just a little bit of site prep to make yourself not only more comfortable, but to get you that extra insulation. Even if you're tent camping and stuff like that, the people that complain about, oh, I had a terrible night's sleep because there was rocks under me. Well, there was a lack of site prep there. You know what I mean? Sometimes there's no choice. We understand that. You just set up in the best place you can. However, you can take a little bit of time, maybe gather up a little bit of moss, make an underlay for your tent to make it that much more comfortable to lay on, and it's going to save you all that heat. So a little bit of prep goes a long way. That's why Ben and I will often say we don't like going in at night. Even with all our best gear and stuff like that, and it does happen, don't get us wrong, we're not saying that it's impossible to go in at night. It's just, it's not the most favored way to land into an area, just to go in at night, try and set up really quick and go to bed, because it's really easy to miss stuff, and it makes for an uncomfortable first night's sleep. Like a little bit of breeze going through might not be enough to make you freeze, but it might be enough to kind of make you uncomfortable, and then you spend the whole night kind of shifting around your sleeping bag or your sleep system, and you're always trying to just get rid of that one cold spot. Or in other instances, like we talked about when we went out on the waterfall trip, we sometimes just underprepare and it gets colder than you think. And we probably could have prepped a little bit better and made ourselves a little bit more comfortable on that second night too, simply by changing the way we went through. And like I said, it's really undervalued, that initial setup, that initial prep of getting your sleeping area ready for you to sleep.
Yeah. Sort of something that comes to mind there, and we'll get to this as we go on, is if you buy really high-end expensive gear, then you don't have to spend time prepping. But if you're using more traditional or less expensive gear, that prep time means a ton. And so what we're looking at in this case is if you're going out and you're saying, time is an absolute essence, then buy the $10,000 worth of gear. And you can set up in 15 minutes in the dark and be super comfortable. We're not going to argue with you on that.
No, not at all.
Right? But that's not skill, that's bot. Not complaining about it. It's bot comfort, right? And you can do that in a million different ways, but you can do it with skill. But skill takes time. It takes time to learn. It takes time to do. So.
And I guess that depends where you end up on the spectrum of how much money you have to spend and how much of that you are willing to spend, because both of those are factors that are going to limit stuff. If you have unlimited money and ambition, man, there's some real nice stuff you can get out there, like campers. They come with heaters in them and fridges and a bunch of other neat stuff.
And truth be told, in the right circumstance, neither me or you would turn down, a high-end, 1200 fill powered down over quilt and under quilt, and
the right circumstances, somebody dumb enough to offer it to me.
Right? If we could afford it, or if we could acquire it through any means possible, we would use it and we would enjoy it, and we would never, think less of ourselves for using it. So if you have this stuff and you don't, what we're talking about doesn't mean anything to you, go ahead,
That's perfectly acceptable. Don't get us wrong. We're not bashing on anybody that has the equipment, and this podcast may not specifically hone in on the specific needs for you. but still worth a listen. You may learn some stuff in case that stuff ever fails on you. One of the big things that we talked about earlier was down versus synthetic. Down's great until it gets wet. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So what happens if your, I don't know, $1,000 down sleeping bag falls in the river and you didn't have a dry bag? Like, you need a backup. You know what I mean? So
Yeah, 100%. So the next evolution to that. So this is, we're talking about basically the previous one was like a debris type thing. So materials you can find readily and plentiful in the area. That works out great if it's available, and more power to you if you can find that stuff and you have time. The thing, what I think you said earlier, most people underestimate is the amount of time and effort it takes to do that. This is not an easy process. And anyone says, oh, I can go out and set up a decent debris shelter in 15, 20 minutes. Wow.
it's not a decent debris shelter. You know what? I've never seen it happen in 15 minutes and it be a decent debris shelter. I'm sure somebody out there is determined to prove us wrong, and I would like to see it. But I have not seen a decent debris shelter built in any less than several hours.
Yeah, I mean, the only way I could see it is if you have a place where there's a ridiculous amount of debris already blown into an area, and you have like a good rake to pull it all in quickly. So if you went in with the right gear and the right circumstances, because I've seen forests with a lot of debris littered and kind of dry, maybe you could do it. Chances of you hitting that are pretty slim, but whatever, right? The next thing, sticking with the natural is, and I already kind of mentioned it, hides. So if you can get something like a caribou hide or a moose hide or a bear hide that's been properly cured and taken care of, that can offer you a huge amount of both comfort and insulation. If people don't know, especially something like a polar bear or caribou, their hairs are actually, I believe, hollow.
Yep.
Caribou for sure. And so they naturally have like this dead air space in them anyways, and it won't compress down well. And what you do is you actually sleep on the fur side. But the skin side provides you a couple of things. One is a moisture barrier. So it's going to prevent moisture and stuff from the ground from coming up. It's going to give you some insulation, some decent height. If you throw that on top of even a little bit less debris than you had before, now you're going to have an extremely comfortable place to sleep. And if you have a few of them, you stack them, right? The more hides you have, the better off you're going to be.
The more insulation it provides you, funny enough. And something I
Yeah.
just thought of to back up tiny bit, Ben, while it's on my head.
Yeah.
If in your shelter, be it a built shelter, natural shelter, whatever the case may be, the lowest point in that shelter is going to be where the most cold air collects. Even when you're setting up that shelter, it's something we never really mentioned, is cold air tends to sink, warm air tends to rise. So if you have the ability to get up a little bit, this is why raised beds, you'll hear that term a little bit in bushcrafting. People opt for these simply because it gets you into a higher part of your shelter. Generally, the heat will collect there and stuff like that. Even in your tent, if it's on a wicked angle for whatever reason, you will notice the lowest part of that will probably be a little bit cooler than the highest part of that.
Yeah, it's a good point. In fact, if you ever see, we haven't quite gotten there yet, but let's quickly mention it. A Quincy hut or a snow hut. The suggestion is that you kind of enter at a low level, and then you have like a couple of foot high benches that you would sleep on in these things, and then you can put candles kind of down low. The heat kind of rises, and you create this. I think the wording I heard from I think it was probably Jeremy. It was like a heat channel. And you get the same thing in a hot tent. Really close to the ground is a lot cooler, but you step up like 6 inches to a foot or 2 feet, you can feel like levels of heat, and it gets quite warm near the top, right?
Yep.
So in these cases,
I don't know if the term you were looking for is thermal layering, but that's the one I thought of.
Okay, yeah, it works too, right? So, what you'll naturally get is that cool layer close to the ground. The right sleep setup can help alleviate that. Even if you're in that cold pocket, you can be insulated within it. But get up there, you don't need as much insulation. So,
No, it's
be aware.
completely true. I'd rather be outside joining us. Hey, all watching live from the garage. Thanks for joining us. Hopefully, it's warm out in the garage, or maybe it's not. Maybe you're already dipping into your bedding out there, and we'd love to hear from you. So, yeah, anyway, I just wanted to back up and mention your actual position, and that's what I was thinking was getting a little higher off the ground. So, perfect points there, bed. So, where did we end off? We ended off with natural debris underneath, leaves and stuff.
Yep.
Um,
And then
where
we went to hides.
hides.
So like, and I think that's kind of there for like just purely natural. Anything after this, we're going to start talking about synthetic or slightly man-made objects, um, right? Um, and the first thing that comes to my mind is just cheap things that we can get. So air mattresses and foam mats.
So,
Uh,
I do have an interesting, or I don't know
oh,
if
you
it's
have a
interesting. I have an opinion on air mattresses versus
okay.
foam mats. So I do get a lot of people that say, "Oh, I'm going to be fine. I'm going to take my air mattress. That'll get me off the ground. Therefore, I won't be cold." Problem is that air mattress is filled with a void of air. Funny enough, air mattress. It doesn't
Strange.
retain the heat that you put into it. It actually does act as a little bit of a heat sink and it kind of goes out. You're still going to be cold. Is it as cold as sleeping on the ground? No, by far it's not. You are getting a little bit of heat above and beyond that. However, you're not going to be warm. You need something on top of that, like an actual thermal layer to try and help you keep that residual heat next to your body. The air mattress makes you comfortable, not necessarily warm. I believe, once again, personal opinion, feel free to flame me for this or whatever, but I believe that air mattresses don't do a lot at keeping you warm so much as keeping you comfortable. Great part of a sleep system, but not the end all to be all.
No. I agree. Especially when you start looking at, say, these 6-inch air mattresses like the Walmart Canadian Tire Jobbies that are meant for summertime sleeping in a tent, car camping type thing. Because you have a large volume of air. You have, say, 6 inches high by 6 foot long and say 2 feet wide or 3 feet wide. So if you work out the square footage of that, 2 by 6 by 3, 12, 36 square feet of air, your body is essentially trying to heat that air up. And then you have all that surface area that's not covered by your sleeping bag, and half it's sitting on that cold ground. So you're trying to heat that air up, and the ground's trying to cool it. And you have that 6-inch gap. And like I said, air is not a great conductor, but you're never really going to get that air warm. So that thing, really, if you have nothing protecting you from that air mattress, that thing is a bit of a heat sink. It's just a slower heat sink than other means.
And funny enough, the reason I pulled up the picture for anybody watching us on the live show is I have this air mattress. The one I have
Yeah,
doesn't have the 12-volt pump built in, but
yeah,
mine is like this. It's one of those double thicks, amazingly comfortable and great in the summer. In the winter, it gets cold and it contracts for one.
yeah,
It becomes more brittle, so you have to be very careful with it. And it offers pretty much no thermal value. Like,
yeah.
literally
No,
does not. I have slept on it and slept on the ground, and I found very little difference between the two.
uh, yeah. It's like you said. It's basically comfort, and not much in the way of insulation, if any. I think it is better than sleeping on the ground, but that's about it, all I'm going to say for that.
Way more comfortable.
Yeah. I To compare that though, throw something like the Hibernate up or the XPad
That's what I'm looking
or
here for, is the one we bought. Where's that at?
so what he's looking for, and there's a few versions out there. I know a couple of people had this one and didn't like it. We've had it, love it. Uh, it's not as thick. I mean, they sit maybe 2 inches thick at the thickest. They're made of a whole bunch of modules or tubes that are usually filled with like a down or some kind of insulation value, maybe something that has some radiant, you know, ability to reflect heat back into you. And this is going to give you both an air gap between the ground and you and an actual insulation value. And you're not going to have the same heating issue. Um, they're also usually designed so that your sleeping bag system actually doesn't lose all its insulation value because it can actually fill into the grooves and gaps, providing you, allowing that, say, down or synthetic insulation to still be working, even though you're compressing it in some areas. It's not compressed all over, so you gain something from that. So you can actually get an R value. Some of these have an R value of 3 to 5, 3 to 7, depending on what I've seen.
Yeah, I was
I
gonna
think,
say I think these ones are 4.3. Man, I'm having a wicked time finding that.
yeah, I
There
haven't
it
seen
is.
them lately. I haven't looked. Um, but
Found
it's
it
a
on the
product
website.
we both have and used. So keep an eye out for these. But they're insulated ultralight mattresses. So there's a few advantages compared to that one from Canadian Tire that he showed you a few minutes ago, which
Aha!
is basically the size of a briefcase. Yeah. So these are about the size of, you know, probably a 500 milliliter drink.
Yeah, but a little bigger than a can of pop or soda
Yeah.
from wherever you're at.
So what you see here is you have all these balls, but in between these balls, there's an area that your sleeping bag will actually fill, and you still get insulation value from both your sleeping bag and your air mattress. And then inside is this insulated material that prevents the air from being able to move around, and it means that each of these pockets are insulated themselves, and it works. Was it they listed here as -10?
Yeah, down to -10.
I have slept in colder than -10 in a hot tent with these things and been extremely comfortable. So we have frozen ground underneath this. Yes. Frozen ground underneath us. Do not turn the TV on. Okay. And been very comfortable. So that system kind of works. What you can pick up for about a third the cost or less, maybe even significantly less than third, uh, is just a foam mat. And
The big
honestly,
con- oh, sorry.
like I say, honestly, very similar insulation value.
Yeah, I was gonna say the big common ones is like around here anyway. The Woods self-inflating air mattresses from like Canadian Tire, Walmart.
Yeah,
They're super common, and they have like a layer of foam in between, and then it's kind of like an air mattress on the outside, but you compress it down. So when you open the valve, that foam expands, it pulls air in, you reseal the valve, and it gives you a little bit of the air. Plus, it gives you that insulation value in there. The trade off with these things, however, is they're generally a little bulkier, a little heavier. But like Ben
yeah,
said, for a fraction of the cost, they generally do offer, or if not better, R values.
yeah. So, a little bit more bulk, but still get some decent insulation. Something else you can use that I have used and it works really well is a product called Reflectix. And if you're having trouble finding Reflectix, uh, you can often find it at Canadian Tire, Walmart, Dollar Store, in the form of a windscreen protector uh, or a screen shade. And I know what I'm thinking, talking
Oh, I
about.
know
You probably
exactly what you mean.
and
Usually they're put on the front window of a car to reflect the sun back out so it doesn't heat up inside.
it looks a bit like bubble wrap, but it's silver,
See if I can find
and
an image of it here
it's
for
got the
us.
flat material on both sides. It's very reflective, and it has that air gap in the middle. And you lay that underneath you, and it gives you a decent R value. And I have used this stuff in a hammock in the winter, and it honestly, comfort wise, as in hot and cold, rivals, if not better, than my underquilt.
Oh, for sure. And the beauty of this stuff is you can actually cut it a little bigger,
Yeah,
and it actually cocoon you a little bit in your hammock. The big problem with it's not a problem. The thing with under quilts is you got to buy the right size and R
yeah,
value for what you want to do, and you have to be able to set it up. So it takes a little bit of a learning curve and all that good stuff. This stuff here, cut it a little bigger than what you're looking for. Throw it in your hammock. You don't need a hammock that specifically has a pad sleeve or anything like that. Some hammocks they'll have like an extra little zippered side where you can slip in a sleeping pad or something like that.
yeah.
These don't really need that. You can just lay it in, throw your stuff in, and away you go. The only little bit of a downside is if you are really hot, they don't breathe super well, but hopefully you have a couple layers of material between you to offer that kind of, circulatory layer, if you will.
So you've hit the nail on the head there. One of its advantages slash disadvantages is it doesn't allow moisture to travel through it. So when you lay on it, you will tend to almost sweat just because it is relatively warm, and if you're clammy or anything, you'll stick to it. The other thing is that it may slide around a little bit on you. So definitely making it a little bit bigger helps prevent it from sliding, and it does give you that side insulation. But it's a decent method. It just takes a bit of a learning curve to use. Hard to beat it though. Ultra lightweight, a little bit bulky, but honestly, I would argue takes up less room in your pack than a lot of underclothes.
Yeah, I would agree. Like overall bulk.
Yeah.
Something we haven't mentioned a lot, but it's kind of a man-made natural material would be like straight up wool. Wool
Yep.
is a great under material, and it was one that I commonly used a lot when I slept on the ground. Take a oversized wool sheet, double it up 2 or 3 times, throw it down. Does it offer you a lot of protection from rocks and stuff like that? Nah, you're still gonna feel a lot of them, but does it act like a good thermal layer? Absolutely, and it doesn't have to be very thick to become an effective thermal layer. Wool traps a lot of air in it, and the air will, in turn, kind of like block your own heat from getting dispersed out.
Yeah, no, 100%. Wool is great, and I find it's really good when mixed with something else. So if you have one of those, like the hibernate, so like the ultralight air mattresses that are already insulated, and you wrap one of those with a wool blanket, it definitely multiplies its ability. And the nice thing is exactly what you're trying to talk about. It isn't affected by getting damp, or it's like I think it's still 80%
It
as
retains
effective.
70 to 80% of its thermal
Yeah.
value or something. Yeah,
But it prevents you from getting damp too, because it's breathable. It's very breathable, like wool is, but air and moisture travel through it very slowly, which is it's saving grace and it's losing grace in that point. But man, mix that with something else, and you have a system that's hard to beat. Wool has a ton of advantages. It's basically fireproof. It won't burn off very easily. If an ember or something hits it, it'll protect it, which a lot of these other things we've talked about is not. Um, you take that same wool blanket and throw over debris bedding, it's going to be so much more comfortable, and it definitely it multiplies that ability. Um,
so just want to shout out Red Sand Adventures is joining us here again. Good evening to you as well. And a new first timer, Christopher Jones. Hey guys, hello from Massachusetts, USA. Thanks for the show. Only discovered you last week and have been enjoying your earlier episodes. Well, it's awesome that you were able to jump in and join us on one of the live episodes, Christopher. By all means, chime in anywhere you have. We'd be more than happy to hear from you, good sir. But yeah, wool is great. I still like wearing wool. If you can find like a good wool sweater and a good pair of wool socks and a wool thermal bottom layer, man, you can get into some really cold weather and be very comfortable.
and still, like I think we're both like this, and correct me if I'm wrong here, but I doubt you will. We're both big thrift store shoppers, so we can get into a thrift store. If there's a thrift store near either of us and you really want to find us, look at thrift stores. We're probably in there poking around trying to
Yep.
find this
I
stuff.
literally go straight to the blanket section and look for wool blankets every single time I set foot in one.
Yeah. And similarly, maybe not the very first thing I hit, but I almost always check the blanket section out and I look for a good wool blanket. And you don't always find them, but when you do, and sometimes you do, and there's like a dozen. And then the next time you go there and there's none, or it's like a 50-50 mixture, or they're just too small, like they're kids. But keep an eye out, you'll find them. I mean, there's so much you can do. If you find a really good one, and you can get it for 5, 10, 15, $20, like buy that stuff. Because take a look. If you wonder how much they're really worth, go on to Hudson Bay and look and see what a Hudson Bay wool blanket costs today. And I think last time I looked, they were like over $100.
Oh yeah, I got a queen sized, 100% wool blanket for our actual bed. I use it for outside too. Don't get me wrong. That was the
Yeah,
original purchase off it, but it has since made it into our bedroom for literally like I sleep with the window open
yeah,
100% of the year. So during the
yeah,
winters, and Mel might have told this story before, when she first started dating me, it was not uncommon for like drinks she left on the nightstand to be frozen in the next morning. So I had to figure out ways of keeping her warm, and wool was the big thing. So Red Sand does have a question here. Would a yoga mat be any good? I'll let you go first on this, Ben.
In theory, the material it's made out of is very good. The problem with most yoga mats I've ever seen is they're too thin. Um, Generally, significantly under a quarter inch, where you're looking for probably something that's a half inch to three quarters or an inch if you can get it. Um, in that case, if you can find a thicker yoga mat, probably. Even the interlocking foam mats you used to find at the dollar store would probably give you a better insulation. You could use yoga mats, but the thicknesses I generally see, you'd probably want like 3, 4, or 5 of them, honestly, to get anything worth it.
And yeah, I kind of have two thoughts on that too. The typical thin yoga mat, very little protection. Now, my wife has a rubber backed yoga mat and it's on the larger side. It's about a half inch thick. That thing works great because you can throw
Yeah.
it in your hammock and it doesn't shift around because that rubber backing, or you can put it on the floor and it works as, or on the ground, whatever, and it acts like a vapor barrier. So it depends. If it's just kind of look at it and really think to yourself, if I was to sleep on this, is it going to add anything to it? And I know that sounds very almost like a cop out to your question, but honestly, it's going to depend literally on the yoga mat you're holding in your hands. I have seen decent ones. I've seen a lot of ones I'd probably pass on to.
Now, I seen something, I think it was at the dollar store, and I don't know if you find it there now or not, but there was, and it looked like bamboo, but it had a mylar backing on it.
Yeah, I think that
So
was
that's
literally. I think I seen something similar. It was for covering. Actually, I can't remember what the hell it was for. Go ahead.
that was a sand mat. I thought it was meant for summer, but anyways, this thing probably would give you some insulation just because it had that mylar backing. But again, very thin, rolled up. I, I think you'd have to use it with something else. Like you could throw that on top of an air mattress and maybe get that same value. So a yoga mat, I would have to say it would need to be used in conjunction with something else. Uh,
It'd be
Possibly throw
excellent to
that.
throw on top of a debris that you already built or something like that. It's going to
Yeah.
act as that thermal barrier, and it's going to add a lot to that.
Or use it as the vapor barrier between the ground and your wool blanket. You get something out of that. Um, Maybe throw that underneath for your air mattress just to protect your air mattress. Is there functions for a yoga mat? Definitely. Would I say that it gives you a ton of insulation value? I would have to say probably not. But again, thicker
Mileage will
ones
vary.
maybe. Yeah, thicker ones maybe. Uh, you know,
I would definitely use one in conjunction with something else. And I guess it's safe to say most of these things that we're talking about for under your sleep system, the more of them you can stack up, if that makes any kind of sense, or the more you can layer these things up, the better off it's going to be. So if you got a debris build up like out of leaves and grass, and you throw a small air mattress on top of that, or no, better yet, throw like a foam pad on top of that, it's going to be great. If you have an air mattress and you throw a foam pad on top of that, that's going to be even more. Like the more you can layer these things up, the better off it's going to work for you as well.
yeah. No, definitely.
So we kind of looked at
Um,
what's going to go under you, and we've already alluded to this, and we're coming up on 40 minutes, so I did want to cover it. Is we talked really early on about synthetic versus natural materials when it comes to like over top of you as well. You may hear us say sleeping bag a lot. That's just because that's the most prime example. But what's getting more and more common, especially around the hammock community, and you can probably attest to this, Ben, is over quilts versus sleeping bags.
Top quilts.
Top quilts. That's it.
Yes. Yeah. And actually, it's really popular now, even with ground sleepers, because exactly what we talked about. Generally, when you sleep in a sleeping bag, the bottom part is compressed and it loses its value. So ultralight guys are using a top quilt system too. And you'll find some of them are literally the top part is insulated, but there is a bottom part, but it's just a blanket because that insulation or that area was just giving us bulk when we tried to and weight that wasn't giving us any value. That needs to go to your inflatable mattress or something that gives you insulation in a different way. So whether it's those foam pads or an inflatable mattress or something, those ultralight guys were looking at it and saying, I can cut the weight of my sleeping bag virtually in half by using a top quilt and a better, and still using the mat I had to use anyways.
And I guess on that note, anybody that looks at a sleeping bags or a quilt of any kinds like temperature rating, we've said this in prime or previous episodes, but I'll lightly touch on it again. There's generally three ratings to that. There's like the comfort, there's the bottom end, and then there's survival. Most of
Yeah.
what you're seeing on those bags are the survival, basically meaning you shouldn't die, provided that everything goes right. That means you're wearing a base layer and you're sleeping on something that's not actually leaching the heat out of you. So straight on the ground, you're not going to get that bottom number. That means you're on top of something that's insulated. It doesn't really become a problem. It's that kind of outer bubble that might survive that, and that's once again providing you got good things over your feet. You're wearing a hat. You have a thermal layer on. Like there's a lot of stuff that goes into those numbers. So once again, reader beware on that. But that being said, generally the lower the number, especially for things when it comes to like downfilling. And that is a very popular one for bushcrafters and just outdoors people in general because it wafts back up with a little bit of maintenance and upkeep. Like down material will last decades. You know what I mean? That's kind of one of the big advantages to it over synthetic, for instance. The problem is, as Ben said earlier, once that compacts, it offers practically no thermal value. So you do have to be able to get it to waft back up, and it does tend to waft back up fairly easily by hand versus once again synthetic, which once it compresses, it kind of tends to over time stay compressed.
So anyone who's used a down mattress will probably agree with me when I say this. Like the very first thing you kind of want to do once you set up with a down mattress is, or a down sleeping bag, is get it out and start fluffing it up. And then you kind of leave it there. You don't do it 5 minutes before you're going to bed because it won't fully loft and you won't get the insulation you're hoping to get out of it. So, if you're hiking in, you get there at say supper time, you set up your shelter, you get your sleeping bag out there, you flip it around a little bit, you shake it, you fluff it, you loft it up, and you toss it in on your bed. You don't put anything on top of it. You let it really rise as much as it can, so that when you get to bed 2-3 hours later, you've got the max lift that you're ever going to get out, the most max loft, and that's going to give you your best value there. With down, you only want to compress it for as long as you have to. So before your trip begins, it should be left preferably hanging, usually upside down, left there for quite a while. And then just before you go to take your trip, you're going to compress it down, take it for your trip. Maybe a few hours, it's really going to be compressed while you're traveling. And you want to decompress it as much as you can. It does take some work.
And honestly, that's good advice for any kind of not hammock, sleeping bag system. All my sleeping bags, though off camera here, I got one hanging in this corner, the big one's hanging on the back wall there, my little one's hanging over there. I had a small one that was hanging behind the crossbows here. Like, I don't keep my sleeping bags in their stuff sacks. It's a big thing I see a lot of people do, even people that are a little bit more experienced. That's how they store their sleeping bags. Stuffed in the stuff sack, in their garages or in their totes or whatever the case may be, which honestly, I understand, space saving, all that good stuff. However, the longer it stays in there, especially if it's synthetic because it develops a memory and it'll stay squished, you're losing a lot of R value off of that.
And you know what? Like, I know what we're talking about, and I agree 100% with you. But the fact is, and I'm as guilty as this, right now I'm in a small condo, and I don't have oodles of room. So my stuff is compressed. I don't have an option. In fact, I don't have a lot of room for a lot of stuff I have and want to have out. So it's stuffed in small containers and compressed. Like, if you have to, you have to.
And that's reality, right? Just
Yeah.
be aware of that when you go to use it. So when Ben went to use his sleeping bag, there's a good chance he would pull it out a couple days before his adventure and make sure it has some time to loft out. And he can see, oh, this spot's really compacted. I better start fluffing that up with my fingers. Just keep it in mind.
So what I would do, and it's exactly what you said, I would get it out and loft it up. I'd probably throw it on top of my bed during the day while I'm at work, for a few days before my trip. I might even take it and throw it in the dryer with a whole bunch of tennis balls, because those tennis balls will beat up any lumps and stuff that have built up due to my misuse of leaving it compressed for days on end. Um, and that's just good maintenance in that fact, right? So tumble dry, low heat, if no heat is possible, and just leave it in there with like a couple pairs of tennis shoes or some tennis balls are ideal. Does make a huge difference. In fact, when I got my down sleeping bag, the first thing I did is take it out and set it up, and of course it had like no loft. And me and a couple of buddies, we all bought them around the same time. And we actually got on the phone and we were complaining. And I went online, I was looking, and that's what someone recommended. And I did it. And I got 50 to 60% more loft right away by doing that. So, and that's a lot. Like, more loft you get, the better. So, whatever you can get is greatest. And since we're talking about it, can we just talk about fill power?
I was just about to say, seeing we're on the topic, I know you understand it a little better than me. Fill rating and loft power.
So, fill power, and I may be off on this if anyone does some research and can tell me I'm wrong, but fill power is basically 1 ounce of down, how much volume it will fill. So 800 is a relatively common when you see that in a lot of sleeping bags and stuff, and that's considered good. Not great, not excellent, that's considered good. You can get cheaper stuff that's like 450, goes into a lot of lower end down jackets and stuff. Gives you some insulation, has some compressibility, but it's not as much. The more expensive stuff would be like 1200 elder down and some types of high-end goose down. And this stuff is expensive. This is about the purest you're going to get. It's got the most loft for weight. And so what that means is it's going to be the most compressible, and it's going to loft back up the most for the lowest amount of weight. So you don't see a lot of sleeping bags out there that are 1200 fill power, because honestly, that would probably be a $10,000 sleeping bag, or at least a $5,000 or $6,000 sleeping bag, where people scoffed at spending $1,000 or $1,500 on a sleeping bag. A decent down sleeping bag oftentimes will be in that range. So the higher the fill power, the better, essentially, but the more you can expect to pay. So knowing that, keep an eye out at, look at that number when you're buying. Find out, is it pure down or is it down and feather mix? Because feathers are heavier and don't offer the insulation. And what you'll see that is a lot of duvets. A lot of duvets are a mix. Go to IKEA and you'll see like a bunch of duvets. You can see the ones that are down are very expensive. The ones that are feather and down are a little cheaper, and the ones that are synthetic are even cheaper than that. That's the reason. Down is expensive. It's hard to get. The higher the fill power, the more value it is. So basically, the higher the fill power, the higher the price, the less weight you would need to fill the same area.
Yeah. So, like I said, that's kind of the thing on that, because I know that confuses some people as well. It's definitely something to keep in mind while you're looking there. Now, we have talked about down a lot. There is other materials. Basically, anything that's not, down, it's going to be some sort of synthetic, be it polyester, nylon, a few other ones, depending on how much you're spending. But and then some other companies will say they have proprietary blends, but they'll still generally say that they have a fill power or a loft rating or something like that. And it's going to be somewhat comparable to the down. Problem is, you're going to get that in lower numbers. Down tends to have a lot more thermal rating to it per weight, as where synthetics, they're great while they're fluffy. They even tend to do better while they're wet. You can wash them and stuff a lot easier. They're easier upkeep. However, they wear out over time real easy. But generally, you're going to pay a little less. Like my Teton that I have over here, Tenton, however you say their name, love the sleeping bag, used it quite a few times. It's rated for minus 18 Celsius. It's still wafting very well because I keep it hung up at all times and fluff it up by hand every now and then. However, I am noticing on the bottom side, where I'm normally sleeping, is thinner than the rest of it. And I mean, we're only talking about sleeping in it maybe 20, 30 times. You know what I mean? Which, they wear out. But I still paid. It actually wasn't a whole lot less than what Ben paid for his down one. I think what was it, like 150 to 180 bucks? We bought one of each to see which one was going to be better in size and stuff like that.
Yeah, I mean, so I bought the one Tigris Defender, I think it was called, and I think I paid like 180, just shy of 200 for it. And that's, anyone, knocking, I think it was around 800 fill power, um, duck down. Um, and it was good. It's a good sleeping bag for what it was. I caught it on sale. You got your one Teton. I can't remember the brand you had, or
I'm trying to.
the series it was called. But
The
when
Alton,
we
I think, is what it
what?
was. The Alton, I believe, is what it
Yeah,
was, but I'm not
that
100%
sounds
sure.
right. When we weighed them and compared them, we found them to be relatively comparable. Yours may have been a tiny bit heavier, had a similar temperature rating. They compressed very similarly. The size difference was negligible, uh, and we said that they were very comparable for the price. But that's the thing.
Altos. Altos
Hmm?
S is what mine
Also,
was.
yeah. So, uh, two good options, and like we said, there's a few things with it. The synthetic one can handle a little bit more moisture. It'll loft up easier if it's been compressed for a while. Like there's a few advantages to it for sure, and you really need to choose. And if you have allergies, sometimes synthetic is the only way to go. So keep those things in mind. And there's been a lot of improvements in synthetic downs and synthetic insulations. And honestly, the big differences are in your high end, high fill power versus your high end. The down will win at the higher fill powers. At the lower fill powers and stuff, synthetics can compete. They, in some cases, beat. So just keep that in mind. But that is top. Generally, it's only good in both cases as good top insulation. Um,
Wow.
for
I was just happened to
synthetics,
flip through. So they make a down version of my sleeping bag.
yeah,
Same ratings, same everything. They're still good to -18. So the synthetic one, just for comparison, 116.99 is what it's on sale for now. The
116.
116 for the synthetic. The
Okay,
down version, the only difference is the fill. Now, same fill rating. They're both good to, like I said, -18, all that good stuff. But the down version of the same sleeping bag is 329.77.
yeah. Does it say what the fill power on that particular one is?
Uh, bu- 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 just keep chatting. I will keep looking.
So, yeah, that's sort of just something to look at. Um, for other types of synthetic under insulation, we talked about the air matches. We talked about foam pads, the cheap blue, the standard blue ones you used to find at Walmart, Canadian Tire. They work awesomely good. Like we said, they're about half an inch thick, and they roll up. What most people do in their sleeping or their backpacks to not take up so much room, they just let them like fully open up, and then they stuff everything into the center of it, so it acts like a liner to your backpack. Um, Other than that, you can just roll it up and stick it on top. The beauty of those things is they're basically weightless. For the few grams they add, it's the bulk that's the killer with those. Yeah. Other things you can look at that help. Emergency blankets, those Mylar emergency blankets. We talked about those being fused in some instances with like a foam, or the air bubbles and the reflectics. But that stuff alone offers a great thermal barrier as well as a radiant heat advantage. The thing is, if you lay directly on that on a cold surface, you still lose through conduction. So if you can get that air gap in one of those things, it does help. Uh, can't find fill
Nah,
power.
I can't find the fill power. I even went to
So
their website. I'm sure it's
it,
there. I'm probably just missing it.
it's probably even there, just looking at the price and what their baseline is, it's probably not super high. And maybe they're not even consistent. Maybe it depends on what they can get. So
I was gonna say I'm gonna guess it's like an 800 ish. You know what I mean? But anyway, I digress. If I find it, I'll put it in the comments. So we did have a chance to talk about putting stuff under you. Once again, just kind of recap. Number one thing, folks, get out there and do a little prep. When you go to set up your sleeping area, make sure you're not in the lowest part. Make sure you're not in any sunken valleys, gullies, things like that. And try to get some stuff under you that's going to protect you from heat being leached out of your body. So whatever it happens to be, debris, natural, synthetic, man-made, whatever, you get to it, get something to separate you from the cold ground. Once you get yourself separated from that, provided you're in a decent shelter so wind's not blowing in, do the same thing to kind of keep the heat around your body and from radiating out and leaving. And that's kind of the only trick there is. If you can figure out how to layer yourself up, and I do stress layer up as many of these methods and as many of these things as you can, when you balance that out with the amount of stuff you can take with you, be it weight restricted or just bulk restricted, whatever it happens to be, get as much as you can and you're going to be more comfortable. You're going to have a little better time, if that makes any kind of sense. If you have the money to be able to buy these real high-end down things, you're going to save a lot on weight and stuff. And prep time and things like that. If you don't have the money to buy those high-end stuffs, much like Ben and I here, we try to do a little bit more based on our physical ability, then you're going to have a little bit more prep time. Take the time, do it right. It's going to make your time out there so much more enjoyable. And as you get onto it, it's really not so much of a chore. You find little things that work for you, little tips and tricks and stuff like that, of how to find the best leaves or the best boughs or whatever the case may be. And that's a discussion for another time if anybody's interested in that. But once you figure it out, it's not that bad and you'll sleep so much better that it makes it well worth the effort and time put into it.
So the only thing I want to kind of add, and 100%, we've talked a lot of times about bulk versus price and weight. And bulk has been two of our enemies for years. Weight, we're kind of, I'd like to think we're both fairly strong men, and we've never complained about weight.
No.
But there is a way to get your bulk and your weight down and your cost down. That's really good. And I'm going to share it with you, and you're going to hate me for it. But you need to get yourself a good buddy who has that gear and is willing to share it with you.
No, it's true. Honestly.
So there's somebody here, and you're going to be laughing at home. I hope they're laughing when I say this. I knew somebody with a beautiful titanium stove, and every time I want to go winter camping, I'd invite him, and he would take this beautiful titanium stove. I got to use a beautiful titanium stove without spending the money it took to get one. Now, and this is where it's really funny, I moved across the country. Now I have no access to this thing. So now I have to look at getting one myself. It's costing me a lot of money now. But yeah, no, this is the type of thing. Like, there are ways of getting sort of some of this stuff. Sometimes you can share products, though. You can, if you don't plan on using it at the same time, sometimes you can split some stuff like that. So keep those ideas open. But like we said, thrift stores, used gear, keep an eye open on marketplaces and stuff like that. Practice some of this stuff. Get out there and practice things. Even with the greatest gear, you can enhance it with these practices. We talked about, simple things like the debris. Stop drafts and stuff around your shelter. Throw things on top of your shelter to just sort of give that insulation for the air outside. Just throw some of that debris down and then throw a tarp over the top of it, like you mentioned, and then put your tent on top of something like that. Just going to give you that overall comfort and advantage right away. Things like that. There are plenty of methods, and there's so many sleep systems and so many shelter systems that you can do and add this stuff to. Even to the point of like logs. Lay a few logs down. That logs are great insulators, better than the hard ground. Just you're going to need to find some way to make it comfortable because logs are not comfortable. So just a few other things you can do.
So I did find the loft power on that sleeping bag.
Yeah.
Little, apparently according to Tenton or Teton themselves, it's around 8 to 880. Realistically, people have found it more comparable to about 7 to 750.
Yeah. So to keep costs down, a lot of companies do this. There's nothing wrong with it. they want to put the word down on their product. And some companies even have a hybrid where it's half down, half synthetic. I have some concerns there, but you lose your compress. You have some combined advantages and disadvantages there. Yes, it's well insulated, but it's not as compressible. I'm not sure you're getting the full advantage or the full disadvantage in these things. But yeah, if you buy a set fill power, you're probably paying a bit more. If you buy something with a variance, there may be some savings because you don't have a guarantee in there, or they may be mixing some loads just to save some money. So know though, it still is down. It's still going to give you some advantage. And if you were to weigh the two of those sleeping bags and then look at them compressed, you would see some advantage on the down in both cases. But ask yourself, is it worth spending over twice as much for a marginal
This is what you got to figure out, right? So
yeah. And look around. There's a couple of companies out there that we've talked about and looked into. Agus Max was one, I think, that's been on Amazon for years. I think they're still there. They offer some down sleeping bags that are surprisingly affordable in comparison to bigger brand names. But I would hazard to guess that if they're saying, say, 800 fill power, it may feel like maybe a little bit less, sort of like what the one Titans are saying. Where if you bought from, say, Merrimack or one of the bigger companies, you might see, that being the minimum.
The one Tigris Nordic Defender, is that the one that you had, Ben? It's on for $100 right now.
Wow. Really?
Yep.
I think the fill power on that was 800.
I didn't see the fill power written there, but it's $105, but you might as well say $100. I'll shoot you the link to that, and anybody that wants to find that, just jump on Amazon. That's all I did, and threw in one Tigris down sleeping bag, and it was the first one that came up.
Wow. Yeah, they may be trying to get rid of those. They may be coming up with something.
Yeah, and that's probably what it is. But
Black Orca took a lot of that stuff because they have two brands. For anyone who wants to get to know that, yeah, I still think One Tigris and Black Orca put out some good products. I know some other people have dissed them in the last few years, but I still think they have some good products out there. There are some other companies out there that are putting out some good products too to keep an eye on. Pomali is one. Agus Max was one that's you hear mentioned a lot for sleeping bags. So keep an eye. Well, I think Pomali makes a sleeping bag. I'm not sure right now. But they do make a tent and a stove.
All right. Well, we've come up on our 1 hour, and we kind of slowed down there towards at the end, but I think it was all good, important information. So I think that's where we'll end it off here for tonight. I noticed our viewers kind of steadily dropped off there in the last 10 minutes as well. So I guess that's our sign to get out of here. Same bat time, same bat channel next week.
Yep.
We'll see you all then, folks. Get out there. Have fun.